This is the story of Charles J. Swanson, a brick manufacturer from Fridley, Minnesota. Charles was born in Franarp, Sweden on October 18, 1850. In Swedish, his name was Carl Johan Svensson. Charles was the son of Swan and Maria and had at least 5 brothers and sisters. All of them came to the United States, except Sven. Charles immigrated to America in 1869, traveling to Minnesota. Here he settled in McLeod County near Glencoe. A year later, in 1870, he moved to Minneapolis, where he was employed as a bricklayer. In 1877, at the age of 27, he married Christine Johnson. Charles and Christine had 3 sons, Arthur, George, and Alvin. In 1875, Charles got into the brick manufacturing business with Nels P. Peterson. They started producing brick in 1876 in Crystal Lake Township, near Shingle Creek, about 2 miles north of Minneapolis. The business was known as the Crystal Brickyard, or the Swanson and Peterson Brickyard. In Crystal Lake Township, the brickyard was located in the northeast quarter of Section 12, near the Mississippi River. In 1879, Charles sold his interest in Swanson and Peterson's brickyard and purchased land on the east side of the Mississippi River in what would later become Fridley Township, Anoka County, Minnesota. This gave his new brickyard access to the railroad, which could easily transport his products. There was plenty of competition on both sides of the Mississippi River in those days, as each of the triangles in this graphic show. The triangles represent brickyards. The Mississippi River provided the water needed for making bricks, and the banks of the river provided the clay. This cross-section shows the Mississippi River, on the right, a top cover of sand and gravel, and the blue-gray brick clay below. This photo shows the actual clay pit. Again, you can see the sand and gravel layer on the top, and the stratified clay layers below. This second photo also shows the clay pit. Early brick manufacturing was tough work, accomplished through a combination of manpower and horsepower. Temporary wood structures provided shelter, and bricks were dried on the ground. By 1893, Charles also began to produce hollow brick and hollow tile for constructing fireproof buildings. This required him to build 2 massive 3-story brick buildings. One was 175 by 40 feet, and the other 100 by 40 feet. This sketch looks toward the Mississippi River from the east. Several kilns were also constructed to burn the clay products. What did those products look like? The sketch shows a few examples, but they are small and hard to visualize. Here's a few other examples. Much like concrete blocks, they were not solid, but had partitions in them that allowed airflow. This is a picture of hundreds of clay blocks drying in a building. To produce fireproof blocks, the clay was mixed with 25% sawdust. When the blocks were fired in the kiln, the sawdust burned off. This left a finished product that was light but strong. In the Twin Cities, there was no shortage of sawdust, with all the lumber mills along the Mississippi River. Here is another view of the Swanson Works, taken from the west side of the Mississippi River, looking east. At this point, the 2 massive buildings looked to be 5 stories tall. The Swanson yards peaked in the late 1890s into the early 1910s. Being in a relatively small area, inside a growing metropolis, the clay beds eventually ran out. However, it did remain open in a reduced capacity until the early 1930s. Here is Charles J. Swanson's notation in the 1880 United States Census, highlighted in yellow. Being from Sweden, Swanson tended to employ laborers that were mostly from Sweden. As his business and wealth grew, Swanson became connected with a number of enterprises. Of course, there was the Swanson Brick Tile Company. Swanson bricks were a cream color. There was also the Northwestern Fireproofing Works at the same location. Like his bricks, Swanson blocks were a cream color, spotted in places with pink. Charles eventually became part of the Hennepin County Brickmakers Consortium. Swanson also was involved with several banks. In addition, he was elected to the Minnesota Senate, where he served from 1907 to 1914. Swanson's fireproofing blocks were used in a wide variety of buildings, which included the Swedish Hospital in Minneapolis, the City Hospital in Minneapolis, and Folwell Hall at the University of Minnesota. Folwell Hall had fancy brickwork and ornate terracotta ornamentation. Swanson fireproofing blocks were also used in a number of federal buildings. These included buildings at Fergus Falls, Minnesota, Crookston, Minnesota, Grand Forks, North Dakota, Superior, Wisconsin, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. Quite a few of these buildings still stand today. Christine Swanson died on February 23, 1925, around the age of 72. Charles died about 18 years later at the age of 93 years. Both were buried in Lakewood Cemetery in Minneapolis. Charles J. Swanson had a very successful career. However, that is not what makes him unique. Instead, it is his generous qualities that make him stand out. Let's look at a few examples. First of all, in 1902, at his 25th wedding anniversary celebration, he gave 9 employees who had worked for him for more than 20 years a deed to 40 acres of valuable farmland in Anoka County. One of the 9 employees was his brother Lars. The event was held at the Swanson home near the Fridley brickyard and was attended by ex-Minnesota Governor John Lind. Governor Lind was also born in Sweden and would have been about the same age as Mr. Swanson. The 9 employees were actually given 40 acres of land around Coon Lake in north-central Anoka County, well north of the Fridley brickyard. Coon Lake was a favorite recreation area for the Swanson family. They spent most of their time on the east side of the lake. Several of the 9 employees were given 40 acres of land right next to Swanson's lake home. Clearly he valued his employees, who had essentially been with him since his first brickyard in Crystal Lake Township. Swanson had numerous land holdings around Coon Lake, as shown on this map. In 1904, Swanson built his brickyard employees a church. This is not a picture of the actual church, but it does show what the process may have looked like. It is said that Swanson paid off debts and helped fund the construction of other Swedish churches in Minnesota. Swanson was also a foster parent for Hulda Anderson. When Hulda married in 1909, Swanson gave her and her husband the deed for a $5,000 farm in Wright County, Minnesota. In 1928, Charles gave $1,000 each to 3 employees who had worked 40 years for him. These 3 had also received the 40-acre land bonus from him as well. Finally, in 1933, after the brickyard had essentially shut down, Swanson let the Fred DeCourcy family move into an abandoned home on his property near the brickyard. Fred's son William said the house had been used by a foreman at the brickyard. Fred Jr., Judith, and William grew up in the house and had fond memories of the brickyard and its location. This photo shows William, or Bill, on the left, and his father Fred on the right. The building they are standing by was a chicken coop, which they constructed out of fireproof blocks left near the brickyard. That concludes the video. Please check out my websites at mnbricks.com and chaskabrick.com.